Okay, so welcome to our second webinar for the year for the 25-26 year, and we've got a pretty great lineup. I'm going to go ahead and share. So yeah, we're discussing documenting teacher learning and lesson study. And just to give a couple announcements, right now our board, we've had an election and they've started the fall semester. Actually, this summer, Gloriana remains our chair. Our secretary treasurer is still Melissa Soto. Our program chair is now Beatriz Quintos, and our assistant program chair is Trina Wilkerson, who's one of our panelists today. And then just to kind of look down the pipeline, we've got next month, October 6th, less than a month away. We have lesson study in Americas. We're going to really spotlight some of the folks doing lesson study in the Americas, specifically Honduras and in Chile. And in November, we're going to have a discussion on the creative implementation of lesson study. People are using cameras and really having an important discussion on when does it cease to be lesson study, what is lesson study adjacent, and really talking about in our modern era, how do we make lesson study work when with so many parameters and restrictions and creative solutions to those things. So should be a good conversation. Today's panel, we've got Dr. Colleen Eddy at University of North Texas, Dr. Hee-Jung Kim at Korea University, and Dr. Catherine Lewis, excuse me, at Mills College. And then Dr. Trina Wilkerson, I think, is still having a little bit of technical difficulties, but I think she's here soon, from Baylor University. And our discussant is Dr. Joanna Thomas Zapata. I'll go ahead and stop sharing and hand it over to you, Joanna.
Wonderful. Hello, everyone. My name is Johanna Thomas Zapata, and I will be the discussant in this panel. I'm very happy to be here. Welcome to our panelists. We are going to start with a brief introduction. We learn about your names and the institution you work on, but we really want to know more about your work in lesson study, what you're interested in, what you have been working on in the last couple of years. So we will start with Dr. Colleen.
Just a few things. I just thought it would be nice to have a visual. Let me make it a little bit bigger. So yes, I'm Colleen Eddy. I'm here at the University of North Texas. And yeah, so I wanted to give you my experience with lesson study. It actually began as a mathematics teacher educator. Actually with Trina Wilkerson, Sandy Cooper, you might recognize some of them. My EDD is from Baylor University, but I began as in my beginning years as an NTE here at UNT. We actually did virtual back in the early 2000s, believe it or not. And so that was my introduction, was actually being a part of a team in lesson study and not being a facilitator of it. And then during COVID, some MTEs from across Texas came together, and we looked at how could we promote Torres's rights of the learner, support that. What would that look like if we modeled that as MTEs? With my professional development I've done with teachers for both algebra and geometry, I did this for over 10 years, this work. And from that work, I had a doctoral student, Clinton Petty, who is now faculty in Arkansas. He looked at the motivation of teachers doing lesson study. So I'm going to share just a little bit of that work because I thought that was really important because it came from the teachers that we were doing PD with and actually doing lesson study. So using self-determination set theory as a way of showing the intersection of lesson study with teacher motivation. So not just assuming that teachers are going to buy in to doing lesson study and the perception of the satisfaction of all three. Just giving you a quick rundown of this. This led into 3 areas: positive interpersonal dynamics. These quotes are actual quotes from the participants of that study. collective agency. But I think one thing to consider when doing lesson study, especially with teachers, is that they are all the same. We are human beings and we have different identities. So you can see that in a contentious interpersonal dynamics, that it could be a negative thing, but it can also be a positive thing as well, as a way to justify um, your choices. Just one more thing about this is autonomy. Is I think one of the great things about lesson study is giving teacher agency. And so the idea that it isn't coming from an external person with authority. So a lot of times as MTEs, we're seen as a person of authority in that. So how can we make them uh, have a sense of autonomy and a sense of ownership of that? So here are just a couple of those things. The ability for the participant to self-select their level of growth. We know it's not always the same. And then voluntary based on what they want to learn. So being able to have choice in the creation of the lesson, and then ownership. So you'll notice, we're going to talk about the different phases of learning within lesson study. And I think you'll see here that them having access to that is really important. Here's just a couple of quotes, and I'll share these slides. I'm not going to take a whole lot of time. But you'll notice the motivation, the ownership, and the recognition that the more they put in it, the more they get out of it. One thing I love about lesson study is it's really a form of community of practice, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's research. And I just wanted to promote putting a plug in for a special issue that myself, Trina Wilkerson, and Leanne Jones are editors of School Science and Mathematics in 2027, really looking at the research partnership. So if you believe your lesson study is a research partnership, we would love to receive your extended abstracts by November 3rd. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Colley. So we are moving on to Dr. Trina.
Hi, can you all hear me? I'm having
Yes.
a little trouble. I can't see myself on the screen, so we'll just go with that. And, but anyway, delighted to be here. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share and looking forward to our discussions. To build on what Colleen shared a little bit, I started with lesson study a number of years ago. I'd been doing a Gear Up grant with middle school teachers for about 15 years, and we were getting to the end of our second round of that. And I wanted to leave them with something where they could continue their growth, and gave them a choice. We talked about different kinds of ways they could do that. And of the study type things, we looked at action research and lesson study, and they chose lesson study. For the next couple of years, then we did lesson study with these teachers with the hope of being able to leave that with them as we left. And there were a number of powerful things. I had a graduate student at the time working with me, Rochelle Rogers, who eventually actually used it for her dissertation, and she published on it and has done amazing work with lesson study even today. She continues now, and we do both with pre-service teachers. But in between, one of the things that happened was we had been doing lesson study as individuals. Like Colleen had mentioned, we'd just been doing it as individuals with teachers and guiding and facilitating there. And what we wanted to do is experience it ourselves as a participant instead of a facilitator, a knowledgeable other, et cetera. And so as math teacher educators across a number of universities, we engaged in it, but it was way back before Zoom was a thing. And so we had quite the challenges of doing it virtually when we needed to, because we were at a distance. And it was very powerful learning on our part to help us to understand better what participation in it was, but also what we could learn as math teacher educators and improve our practice. And then currently we work with pre-service teachers and have done a lot of work with them, and shared some insights regarding that. A little later on in the panel, we can talk about some of the aspects of that, but it's very exciting work, and I think one of that is very powerful for all of us as learners in mathematics.
Dr. Catherine Lewis.
Thank you. It was really interesting to hear Colleen and Trina speak. I think there's a big shared commitment here to thinking about lesson study not as kind of a small technical thing, but as something that nurtures teachers' motivation and capacity at school. And my origin story with lesson study is that in the 1990s, I was in Japanese classrooms. I read and speak Japanese, and I was writing a book on classroom management, looking at how children lead classroom meetings and instill a sense of classroom community rather than being dependent on teachers' rewards and punishments. So it had nothing to do, it was on classroom discipline, basically, had nothing to do with math or science. But I discovered by hanging out in elementary classrooms in Japan, I was learning a ton of math and science. And for example, children were given a problem that allowed them to invent or discover pi. And, I had used pi as a number to plug into formulas throughout my career, but I'd never understood why or how human beings derived it. So that was really stunning for me. And the same thing with levers. I started noticing levers and pendulums everywhere in my daily life because the ways that the students were studying them were so connected to daily life and so powerful. And I think a lot of those topics I'd been a very dutiful student and I'd memorized them rather than thinking deeply. Anyway, so that's on me for my poor learning style. But so I began to ask teachers, how did you learn to teach that way? And they were very surprised. And they said, oh, that model lesson on pi, that came from an NSF model curriculum in the United States. And I thought, well, that's weird because I haven't seen that in the United States. So then I said, well, how did you personally learn to teach that way? And they said, oh, lesson study, lesson study. So I've spent a lot of the last 30 years trying to understand lesson study, create resources that would enable US teachers to explore it, and trying to marry lesson study, which is, a process of teacher learning, with high quality materials that would be worth teachers' time to study. And over the past 20 years, I guess, I've been very interested in Japanese style teaching through problem solving. I've been very interested in Japanese style teaching through problem solving, which is the math approach used in Japan, where rather than telling students, demonstrating how to solve a problem initially, you give students a problem that embodies the new mathematics, and they create that new mathematics by individually struggling with the problem and then having a whole class discussion. So fast forward, in the last 10 years, I've been working with some school-wide lesson study sites in California. And I'm really pleased that those sites have taken on school-wide lesson study, which is how it's done in Japan. Teachers work in grade levels. They have a shared school-wide theme. In the case of some of the schools, it's self-confident learners who think deeply, who can justify their thinking. So they work school-wide on creating these self-confident learners who can deeply justify their thinking. And then they think about, well, what does that look for the content that we're teaching at each grade level? So summarize it, I actually have a new book on this out of Teachers College Press, written with a teacher, principal, and professional learning leader from San Francisco, and with Akihiko Takahashi, who I think many of you probably know, longtime Japanese teacher who has introduced teaching through problem solving in the United States. And we chronicle the process by which teacher leadership allowed lesson study to go from one group to school-wide. And they decided that teaching through problem solving was the approach they wanted to use, and built that over a number of years. And the impact on students has been stunning. I mean, these are all urban schools, serve a large proportion of second language learners. And while district achievement in mathematics has been like this at the schools, it's been like this. And that's true for each of the subgroups: for African American students, second language learners, low socioeconomic status students. So the impact on the SBAC has been stunning. Interestingly, in districts that use more kind of short answer recall kinds of standardized tests, there has not been an impact on those. But the impact on SBAC, which has
it's a 4-hour test that includes a lot of problem solving, has been stunning. And I think what's happening there is collective efficacy. I mean, teachers see a problem, they learn to solve it, they see that their colleagues solve it. And Hattie's research tells us that collective efficacy is actually 3 times as powerful as parental involvement or socioeconomic status. You create an environment where teachers see a problem, believe that they can solve it, then they go about solving it, and they hold their colleagues accountable also for solving it. So I feel like I'm, so lucky to have had this at the end of my career. And so the big problem I would love everyone's help with is, how do you sustain and spread these powerful advances?
Thank you so much for sharing. Dr. Hee-Young Kim.
Okay, I'm going to share my slide. Yeah. Hello, I'm Hee-Young Kim from Korea. I actually got a PhD in California, in the United States. But I want to talk about my career. So you can just, I started my career as a secondary math teacher in Korea. So from the very beginning, I was deeply interested in how to teach mathematics better. Which means how can I help my students become more like a powerful mathematicians, or not every student has to become a mathematician, but I want them to become mathematical thinkers and mathematical doers. But it was so hard for me as a beginning teacher. In Korea, we also have a lesson study culture historically. For several decades, we have that one in our school community. So as a beginning teacher, I engaged in lesson study group with 2 expert teachers and another early stage teacher. So we collaboratively planned and revised the research lesson during several meetings. And the day of the open lesson, like a research lesson, I conducted that teaching. And dozen of a beginning teacher, not dozen actually, was over 30 beginning teachers in that city came and visited to my research lesson. It was really fascinating that my students are oh my God, so many teachers are observing our classroom. But what struck me was how the process of documenting our planning and the actual lesson and the reflection afterwards create opportunities for the teachers at different career stages to learn from each other. Yeah, that was moving back to Korea. Moving to UC Berkeley to get a dissertation. And I worked on teacher change in practice in and from professional development and professional learning community, which is part of I think the lesson study is a part of the professional learning community, but it was not a lesson study, it was about the formative assessment lesson professional development. So I had a question how to teach better, right, mathematics. And also as a researcher, I want to know what does it mean by teacher learning and how to help the teachers to become better teachers. So it continues to my career as a professor in College of Education in Korea, and I also was a vice director of the Center for In-Service Teacher Professional Development, and I organized the professional development for the in-service teachers as well as the teacher leaders, like principals and vice principals. And it's more complicated. It's more a lot of complicated real situations in the professional development. And I also work with precept teachers in my students. So across all of those roles and the context, one of my ongoing question has been how can we document the question of this panel discussion, how can we document teacher learning in a very very complicated context, and also how to connect research with practice. so like having a various roles as a professor in Korea. Professor job as a professor job is really like a small, especially in community of mathematics education. So I like acting a lot of different roles in in this country. So it's very complex and messy, and it started again to become my question. So let me go back to the lesson study cycle in the next slide, which I assume that you all know, right? So each stage in this cycle, in the lesson study cycle, provides a lot of opportunities for teacher learning. We will go back to the lesson study cycle that Catherine actually appreciated that she created the Padlet. So we put the ideas. So we will have another opportunity to talk about the teacher learning in this cycle. So the right, uh, the photo that I input in that slide was shown from my research and at Berkeley and also in Korea, which I work on 7 different schools with teachers and principals. So here, I'd like to ask a question, like how we can document. So I use in my research, one of the research, I use the technology like eye tracker. So it's not a lesson study actually, but it's more. I think to prepare this panel discussion, I think that eye tracking might be a tool to document and analyze the lesson study. So, and this study actually comes from my working with my pre-sub teachers. So I am here, the facilitator, and so I conducted the pre-interview with iTracker, and the pre-sub teachers are watching the expert teachers teaching video, and also after that we discuss a lot of like ongoing issues, and what they notice from the expertise. And after like 2 or 3 meetings, I conducted post an interview with the eye tracker, and I want to see how their noticing was changed, and their like discourse analysis. Discourse also changed, which includes their vision and noticing of the teaching mathematics. I really need a framework to analyze what that means. What the teachers notice. So I adopted True Math framework, which I developed as a team in Berkeley. So which True Math framework was used as an interpretive framework, and I could see how the pre-sub teachers' noticing level was changed with this framework, especially in each individual mentions and what they are noticing of the mathematics from the expert teachers teaching. And also, I know that Catherine also worked on the True Math framework with the lesson study in California. So I want to know more about the ongoing things with the pre-sub teachers there. I work with the pre-sub teachers a lot, so I use that framework with this research. And also notice that their reasoning level or interpretive depth of the noticing was also changed a lot after discussion of the expert teachers teaching with this framework. So it was very helpful for me to think about the teacher learning with that framework. And that is lesson study shows us that every stage, like diagnostic analysis or collaborative planning and research lesson and reflection, that stage create opportunities for learning. So I want to ask you a question: that what does it mean by teacher learning? Again, so a lot of things that we can say that teacher learning and growth. So one of and we can see that their visions can be changed, or their knowledge was growing, and their task ability, like a task ability, like how to make cognitive, like a high level of cognitive demand tests can teachers make. And also, I think the first panelist to talk about the teacher agency, which is really important still. So teacher agency, the change, their teacher agency can be considered their teacher learning, and also responsive teaching, or culturally responsive teaching, or student thinking responsive teaching, or equitable teaching can be learned from the lesson study. So that's the things that I working on my pre-sub teachers and also in-sub teachers in the PD teachers. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for sharing, and I think we started a conversation, and we already have questions posted from our panelists, and that's amazing. So just to remind you, focus today is exactly teacher learning in lesson study in the different phases. So specifically how teachers grow their knowledge, refine practice, and work collectively through planning, observing, and reflecting. You all have worked as facilitators, teachers. You have been part of the process from different perspectives, and that make us like make this space rich, right? And I'm sure 1 hour it's not going to be enough. So let's jump in and start thinking about those ideas that you have presented. What is teacher learning? How does that look like in lesson study? And we also know that lesson study brings together teachers' content knowledge, student thinking, curriculum. How do you see the group dynamics shaping teacher learning, either in pre-service or in-service teachers environment? How does that happen, and what does it look like? And we can start with Trina. What do you think?
All right. Thank you so much. Actually, what I want to talk about a little bit actually builds on what several have already talked about, is this idea of really understanding student thinking. And I think one of the things that I've seen in teacher learning is learning more about how to observe and understand student thinking. And one of the things that I found both when I worked with teachers early on in my career, but also more recently in our pre-service teacher, is the power of being able to truly observe individual students and watch them in their problem solving, engaging in discussion, those kind of things. Because often in a classroom, in the US at least, you will have one teacher that has 25 to 30 students. And when they're working and you're doing things, even when you're engaged in lesson study, you as the teacher don't get to really observe individual students as much as you would like to really unpack that thinking. And what my pre-service teachers have shared is that has been the most powerful thing, is to be able to really think about and observe what students are doing and what they're thinking, how they're having discourse, and then how it has gone back and influenced their own teaching when they may be the only teacher that's actually in the classroom. And so that's been very powerful about what they have learned about how to uncover what students think. And I have to attribute, Catherine, I'm so excited to see what you are finding in this long term of student learning, because that's been one of the things that's been the most difficult to capture. And so I think with this, at least one-on-one with individual teachers, they're able to see more about what students are thinking. And I do believe that is impacting student learning, but it's also impacting teacher learning as well. So it's very powerful.
Thank you so much for sharing. And any thoughts or comments, Colleen?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you, Joanna. I think I have mainly worked with in-service teachers. I have worked with pre-service teachers most recently. But I think one of the things that's really impactful about that is how I've already talked about like teacher motivation, how they have the courage to, because if they feel safe within their lesson study group, to take on roles that they might not necessarily feel like it. So, for example, being the one who teaches the lesson is oftentimes a really scary thing because your peers are in the room at the same time. So, it's really important as facilitators and the group to make sure the person knows it's not an evaluation of them, but of the lesson that's being done, so that when they're teaching the lesson, you're coming back and debriefing. One of the cultural things I think that I've seen in lesson study here and in Thailand is that you let the teacher speak first. Like they're the ones who kind of get to tell you from their viewpoint what it looked like, and to debrief that experience before you get to those different roles that people took inside the classroom that were looking at being able to look at the individual thinking and of the group dynamics and stuff of the students as well.
And Catherine, I think many of us want to continue learning about the work that you're doing and how that ties with the teacher learning and agency and noticing students learning. So if you would like to share more about the project.
Thank you. I think building on what Colleen said, one of the things that I think was powerful in working school-wide is that there were some teachers who, a small number of teachers who stepped up immediately to want to lead lesson study, to want to be part of it. But it was a minority of most of the schools. It was a minority of teachers at first who wanted to do this. But because there is something called vicarious efficacy, where, when you watch a colleague address a challenge and succeed with it, it builds your sense of efficacy as well. You think, oh, that person took a problem in their teaching of, not being able to have students talk to one another. It was just teacher, student, and they really worked on that problem. And you can learn from their solution, but you also learn from the fact that they changed some element of their teaching. So in these schools that did school-wide, in general, it was one team of teachers who took leadership initially to try a lesson study cycle, but they worked on a vision that the whole school had endorsed, the whole faculty had endorsed. So usually they began that vision by saying, what are the qualities we want all our students to have by the time they graduate from our site? Okay, if we want all of them to be self-confident and be able to have academic conversations, what does that mean for our classroom instruction? And so that vision was embraced by the whole faculty. So when the rest of the teachers saw this one group of teachers working on that vision in their practice, they said, oh yeah, I care about that vision. And they vicariously saw that, oh yeah, we can do something. And so little by little, all the teachers joined in this collective effort. And so I think that element of teacher leadership and vicarious learning, that you too can do something effective to change your practice, was very powerful.
Absolutely. And we can see how in those different phases and interaction in between teachers, students, facilitators, teachers, or the teacher leading the lesson and others being observers, there's always opportunity for growth, right? And learning. So we have different phases in lesson study. When the planning phase in lesson study is both a site of opportunity and challenge, in what ways have you seen it contribute to or distant from teacher learning? And I'm very interested in service and pre-service teachers, because in maybe pre-service have not been in the classroom much, for instance, or in service have been in the classroom for 10 years. So in those spaces, how do you see these interaction and learning opportunities unfold? And we will start with Hee Young Kim.
Okay, yeah, definitely. Pre-serve teachers are not like learning a lot about the actual student thing, but in Korea, the pre-serve teachers and in-serve teachers are very like has a lot of knowledge about the content as well as the other pedagogical knowledge, and they work. So when I provided the data from the actual classrooms, their analysis on the content things really incredible, especially for pre-serve teachers. So when I work with in-serve teachers, they they are fascinating to notice student thinking. What are the common misunderstandings from that task, and what are the error patterns from the on the specific topic. And also these days, so I actually work with the digital innovation schools in Korea, which means the AI are the schools are done AI and digital textbooks and digital edutech kind of things. And when I observed their classrooms, it was fascinating that the teachers are really easily able to notice students like mathematical thinking. So AI analyze all the student data, and also not only cognitive things like not only the right or wrong, but also the process of the geometry things that students are working on. And also students are typing in like their emotional status. So the AI analyze all the things. So the teachers some teachers actually using that kind of tools, so they notice that like what are the stages of the student, especially the student thinking as well as the emotional things, and then they enter to the classroom with that knowledge. So it's so helpful for them. They just like reflected that it's so helpful to make an informative decision in their classrooms. So where should I, as a teacher, to focus on in that like specific classroom? Actually, that happens with the professional learning community, like in that school. So the teachers are working together with that data. So they the teachers, instant teachers, learn more about the student thinking in with that tools. I try to practice insert teachers like experiences and practices of the knowing the student thinking into the precept teachers. So I invite those data into the precept teacher course, and also invited the actual teacher to teach my students to think about the student thinking in that kind of things.
And building on that, I would read what we shared together in our Padlet for our participants. We as organizers and panelists share some ideas in our Padlet. So about the planning phase, Trina, you mentioned questioning approaches. As teachers co-plan, they can look at different types of questions and what understandings can develop or be facilitated with those questions. Different types of questions may elicit different types of thinking. Different tasks may lead to different questioning strategies, considering both written and verbal questions. How can you engage students in asking questions? What will one listen for? I think that ties to the learning in those different spaces. But if you want to build on that too, Trina, that would be great.
Yes, then it ties in exactly with also with what Hyung was talking about with the differences between pre-service and in-service teachers. But I'll share with the questioning, there are a variety of different types of questions and models for questions. And one of the things that we found with both in-service, but particularly pre-service now, is really studying those different types of questions and what types of questions elicit what type of student thinking has been very important for them to think about. It also comes into play with teachers and both in-service and pre-service thinking about what's the task that I want to provide or the problem, how am I going to empower students to problem pose as well as problem solve, and what that actually entails is them being able to ask the kinds of questions that need to unpack that. But also another part of questioning is engaging students in that so that they are ones that are asking questions. And I think lesson study, with going back to the planning phase, has an opportunity for teachers to develop key kinds of questions they want to be sure to ask, the process places where they want to make sure that students are asking questions and helping students to learn that. And it gives them a chance to really plan into that so that when they're enacting it in the actual teaching of the lesson, they can see how these questions impact student thinking.
Absolutely. Building on that, Colleen, if you want to share some thoughts.
Yes, thank you. What I noticed when Young presented at the very beginning, one of the things she had was formative assessment. And questioning is very much a part of that, and creating those questions. Smith and Stein, in their work in mathematical discussions, has a monitoring form, and we actually, in our professional development, our teachers actually took that to heart, because a lot of times we create really good questions and our focus is on asking the question rather than listening to the responses. And so by having something in hand where you don't have to remember what those questions are, but have them there for you, then it takes the focus off the teacher and onto the students as well. And I think providing teachers with opportunities when learning that they don't have to take all that on, that there's tools out there that are already there that they can use to support the teaching, especially with the use of questions. Because we know, I had another graduate student, Eloise Keener, who has a paper that I co-authored with her, and she looked at this questioning. We have mathematical questioning now, as well as Bloom's taxonomy. And so how do you take these into heart when you are planning, and then when you're actually implementing the lesson?
I think all these ideas, questioning techniques and using technology, there are resources. We're using experiences of in-service teachers and in that knowledge that we have, and also practicing that and bring it to our in-service teachers. That's also a learning dynamic, right? Is us facilitating learning and teacher agency and autonomy, so they believe that what they're doing is important, is real. And that also ties to our next and almost last question for Catherine, and it's related to that planning and teaching phase. And again, I will read something that you posted, uncovering and understanding student thinking and knowledge of cross-grade development. In teaching, you said seeing research lessons at other grades and studying progressions reveals how students' thinking develops over grades and builds awareness of how student success builds depends on experiences at many grade levels. And I would love for you to elaborate on that, and how, as educators, we can use lesson study as a tool and a resource to understand, to see, to notice student learning, and also as educators to be well equipped, right, to teach mathematics.
Thank you. There was, as some of these schools went school-wide, say third grade teachers would see a fifth grade lesson, and they would realize that the understanding of fractions that students had built in third grade was not serving the students well in fifth grade. And it was interesting that, they said, I never get to see how my students' mathematical understandings play out in later grades. So as a result of that, they decided to do another lesson study cycle at the third grade level the next year on fractions. And a couple interesting conversations occurred during that. At the very beginning, one teacher, they decided they would try a Japanese lesson in which you give kids a mystery length and an unruled meter length. And that they would, and the question is, how do I describe this mystery length in terms of meters? And one of the teachers in the group said, there's no way my students can solve that problem. Japanese students may be able to solve that problem, but my students won't be able to solve that problem. And the other three teachers in the group just said, well, why don't we just try it? It's four of us. The worst thing that happens is they can't do it. Let's try it. Let's try it. And kids immediately started putting the mystery strip into the meter to see how many times it would fit. And it was a little bit of a stretch for them. At first they said, it fits in 3 times. It fits in 3 times. Oh, it's a third. It took a little while. So that's an example of how seeing, something play out at another grade level enabled you to take a new, fresh look at your own practice. And also in that planning meeting, which was very rich, teachers made visible their own assumptions about students. And for example, one teacher said, well, I'd like to start that activity in groups. And another teacher said, well, I'd like children to struggle with it on their own before they get the information from other students, because I have some students who coast on other students. So they were also revealing in a very rich way their assumptions about student learning. And I think we all have those assumptions about how students learn, but until we take part in lesson study, we don't ever make those visible so that other people can push back on them or challenge them. So.
Thank you. Any thoughts that any of the panelists want to build on that?
One comment in hearing Catherine talk about what this has done for teachers and their assumptions and making it visible about the learning. One of the things I observed with our teachers that I worked with, it also unveiled for our teachers how empowering engaging in an engaging lesson was for students. I had some teachers that had never done small group work. They'd never really thought through all of that, the questioning. And they were amazed when we would do the reflection at the end about students that they thought would not engage at all in the lesson that actually turned out to be leaders of their group because of the way the dynamics had been set up for the participants, for the students. So it was really empowering, that not only about student mathematical learning, but also about empowering students and how different it could be for students that they didn't think were capable of doing it or would not even participate. We would have some of them that said, I've got this one student who's never going to participate, and yet they engaged heavily. And so I think that was another thing that was very enlightening for teachers to see how empowering students is so important.
So we still have like 8 minutes in this panel, and we are going to take questions from our attendees. We already have one, Gloriana Gonzalez, Dr. Gonzalez. She says, these are great examples. I wonder if you have seen differences in lesson study with elementary versus secondary teachers in your practices or experiences.
I'll get the ball rolling if that's okay.
Perfect. Go for it.
One of the things I've noticed with high school teachers is that the chance during the first study phase of lesson study to really dig deep into some either new scholarship or new ideas about teaching methods can really make it very satisfying for them. So for example, there was a series of maybe 10 years of lesson study efforts in history and social studies in Oakland, California, where every year the high school teachers would explore some new scholarship, like what's been learned about the Civil War, or what's been learned about historiography and how people construct history. And then they would draw out the implications for their teaching and teach lesson study cycles based on that. So I think, at the elementary level, I've noticed that's what's really motivating often is this vision of what are all the qualities we want all our learners to have when they graduate from our site, and what are we doing in our classrooms to build those qualities. That really seems to reconnect teachers to what brought them into teaching in the first place. It wasn't to get good scores on standardized tests. It was to nurture human beings who love learning and care for one another and are good citizens. So I think sometimes I think both elementary and secondary teachers have both those motivations, but maybe in slightly different proportions. But I'd be happy for people to push back on that too.
Yeah, can I join in? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. In addition, yeah, sorry. Yeah. Adding to Catherine's comments, I think I also noticed that the elementary teachers in Korea tend to think about learning in various aspects or in a broader sense. It's not only about the mathematical content, but also about like a student's social emotional development and their like a learning habits, and even how math connects to the other subject like a science and also writing. And the lesson study discussions, elementary teachers also, like in the reflection discussion, they also bring up the questions like, how are students engaging with each other, or how are students engaging in my mathematics teaching? But on the other hand, in high school teachers in Korea are more focused on the structure of the mathematical content and lesson design too, and how can the teacher think about like how to explain the mathematical concept in a deeper way or in an easier way for students to understand. So I think they spend a lot of time discussing task sequencing and also mathematical representations and the mathematical content things, rather than thinking about like other aspects of the learnings. The uh, um, differences that I noticed from those two different groups.
That also ties to something we had in our Padlet, and it says it goes back to the reflection phase in lesson study, and how teachers reflect and learn and can see the differences in practice, like and voice what they think about students and the curriculum and their practice and what they will change next time they teach this lesson. They learn from others' comments and feedback. And something that Catherine shared before was efficacy and vicarious efficacy, realizing you and your colleagues can address a teaching challenge and get better at it. And I think that's definitely powerful. And we will take this 3 minutes just to share what you are up to, what you're working on. I remember, Colleen, you said there is a call for special issue, what projects you have to finish 2025, 2026. And this is just an open space for the four of you as panelists. And I just want to say thank you, and the floor is yours to share with us any final thoughts, comments, or feedback for everybody. We start with Colleen.
Yeah, thank you, Johanna. I think one of the things that could be really powerful, and I think Catherine spoke to this earlier, is I think it's really important that this lesson study, if there is this idea of partnership, uh, partnership not just to improve teacher learning, but ways in which we can talk about the research partnership with the facilitators and the teachers as a community, rather than a lot of times professional development is done on teachers. And what I think makes lesson studies so powerful is it's with teachers. And I think that could be something that could be shared out very well in this special issue that we have.
Thank you. Hee-Young Kim.
Oh, I think I cannot agree. I mean, anymore. I really agree with the Colleen's that like collaboration is the power and agent of the lesson study that can provide a lot of money opportunities for teachers. If one teacher just study a lesson, it's not like that powerful to implement a lot of good mathematical problems or tasks, or how to better support for students. But with the teachers in a collegial discussions and like sharing some thoughts, and also there's teachers are sharing emotional things, and they can move forward to making their teaching better accessible to students, so they can share their visions for especially ambitious teaching, which is really hard for beginning teachers to implement in their practice. And collective analysis of student thinking, which is really helpful for especially for beginning teachers. In the reflection phase, on the Padlet, I think that Akihiko Takashi reflected that when he was a beginning teacher, it was so surprising that he didn't notice anything that the teacher noticed. So, which means really collective reflections and collective analysis of the student thinking, even other important issues in classroom dynamics or other content things, will be helpful for learning together. So that's, I echo what Colleen.
Thank you. Trina, any final thoughts?
Well, it's been wonderful to hear from everyone and to have all the different ideas and ways of reflecting on lesson study itself. So it made me think about Colleen talking about partnerships. We actually have a group here that has the opportunity to partner in many ways through the Lesson Study SIG and others across the US and the world who are engaged in lesson study. And so working collectively, I think there are things that we can work on together to talk about other issues that we are having. How do we build things like where it becomes school wide? How do we develop partnerships and leave partnerships where they're continuing with lesson study without us and a grant here? Because that's what happened with mine. When the grant money went away, I thought one group was going to continue, and they were. The principal was on board, everything worked out beautifully, and then the district changed something so that they could not meet anymore. So it was really I think it's a really good opportunity to think about ways to implement this so that it empowers teachers to work in their own collective schools that they're in as well.
So much, Catherine. Any final remarks?
Building on what Trina said, the shameless promotion, but the new book that I've written with Akiko Takahashi and 3 educators from San Francisco, the last couple of chapters are focused on how can I nurture lesson study in my school, in my district, what practical steps can we take as educators? And I really hope we'll have some chance to think about that together, because, I think the problem has been that this is a very valuable and deep, but also very challenging form of professional learning, and we need to change the culture that we're in order to do it.
Well, nothing to add. This has been great. On behalf of the Lesson Study SIG at AERA, we really want to thank you for your time. We are all in different time zones, and so this has been a rich conversation, and I hope to see you all in the next event. Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you all.
everyone.